Ilia Topuria versus Arman Tsarukyan is not going to be close, and let me explain why. So obviously, we know that this fight is not going to happen anytime soon, as Ilia Topuria is obviously fighting Justin Gaethje. We all assume that he's going to just get rid of him with ease, and we don't even know if this matchup is going to be next for Arman Tsarukyan and for Ilia, or is Ilia going to have a super fight with Islam. I think that he should be fighting Tsarukyan next after Justin Gaethje, unless Arman Tsarukyan decides to fight Oliveira in the meantime in the rematch, and potentially he could lose that fight as well. Um, and I think for Islam Makhachev, he has to stay active against the other welterweight contenders. There are just too many welterweight contenders for him to defend his belt against. There is Carlos Prates, Ian Gary, Michael Morales, you name it. Now, I personally think that Ilia Topuria would knock out Arman Tsarukyan. I think Tsarukyan, as good as he is, I do believe that he is the second best lightweight in the world, right? Like, he is the best if you're not going to include the champ. I think he's obviously better than Oliveira because he beat him. He's better than Justin Gaethje. He's better than Holloway and the majority, or the rest of the lightweights as well. But I just don't think that he has the tools to go out there to beat Ilia Topuria. I know people are, I guess they are just overrating. In my opinion, they're overrating his wrestling because they're making it seem as if this matchup is going to be similar, if not identical, to Chimaev versus DDP, or even Islam versus JDM, or even Holloway versus Oliveira. I'm here to let you know that first things first, Ilia Topuria's wrestling is far better than DDP's, JDM's, and Holloway's, both defensively and offensively, when it comes to the wrestling and the grappling. And I'm also here to let you know that Tsarukyan's wrestling and grappling, both defensively and offensively, is not better than Chimaev's or Islam's, right? Ilia Topuria is no slouch on the ground. Obviously, we haven't seen enough from him on the ground for us to be able to tell really how good he is. How good is he on the ground? Like, the main highlights that he has in the UFC when it comes to his ground game is him submitting Bryce Mitchell and him, pulling a crucifix on Charles Oliveira, which I think is a massive feat. It's not obviously the biggest thing in the world because he didn't submit Charles Oliveira or control him on the ground or even destroy him on the ground, but the fact that he was able to, you know, be on the ground with Charles, pull a crucifix, and completely nullify Charles' strength, so then be able to get up and survive that leg lock. Um, I think that's impressive, and people are sleeping on Ilya's ground game. I feel like they think that he's this, one, one trick pony. All he does is just rely simply on his boxing. Ilia is one of the best, if not the best striker in the UFC right now, and that's not in terms of versatility because he obviously does not mix in the knees, the kicks, the elbows. But if we're talking effectiveness, in terms of that, he is one of the best, if not the best. Simply relying on his crisp boxing skills and low kicks does the job and knocks out the best of the best. Saryukian, if he is going to beat Ilia, this question is for the people who think that he's going to beat Ilia. How do you think he's going to beat Ilia? Do you think he's gonna knock him out? There's no way. There's no way he's gonna knock out Ilia Topuria. That's just not gonna happen. Like, just physically, it's not possible. Saryukin, yes, he's starting to improve. He's starting to show some progression in terms of his striking in his stand-up game, but he is not even at that level where he could knock someone like Ilia Topuria out. He knocked out Benil Dariush. That was his last TKO slash KO win. You're not gonna sit here and compare Topuria to Benil Dariush, right? To old man Dariush. The second question is, do you think he is going to submit Ilia Topuria? Just for the record, Arman Tsarukyan has one submission win inside the UFC, and that's in his last fight against Dan Hooker. I'm guaranteeing you this right now. If Ilia fights Dan Hooker, he doesn't even need to knock him out. He could just submit him. So again, Arman did what he had to do against Dan Hooker, and he submitted him. But that's not an impressive feat because Dan doesn't really have a ground game, right? Ilia Topuria would do the same thing to him. Oliveira would do the same thing to him. Him controlling Dan and submitting him does not mean that he's going to do the same thing to Ilia Topuria. It's just not. It's just not the case, right? So how do you think he's gonna beat him? By decision? You don't think in a 5-round fight, 25 minutes, Ilia's never gonna find his chin? Ilia's never gonna use his boxing skills, his cage cutting skills to just knock out Arman Tsarukyan to catch him off guard. Arman got clipped and rocked in multiple occasions against Charles Oliveira. He also got wobbled by Joaquim Silva, who's obviously not even, I don't even know if he's in the UFC anymore, and who was never even really ranked. I don't think so. And yes, that was, a while ago, but the Charles Oliveira, that was 2 fights ago, right? So he's not going to knock him out, obviously. We have established that. No one thinks that. He has one submission win in the UFC, and that's the Dan Hooker. And he usually goes the distance with people. He obviously does have some TKOs, but he doesn't go out there and fight guys that are like so much better than him in the striking, and he just defies the odds and goes out there and knocks them out. He doesn't do that, right? He doesn't have the power in his hands. He does have some versatility, like he did, pull the axe kick on Charles Oliveira. He does have some of those tools in his bag, but it's not going to be enough against Ilia Topuria, who's a maestro in striking, right? He's the best boxer in the UFC, in my opinion. Like, how I see this fight turning out is very similar to Pereira versus Ankalaev. If you combine both of the fights, like if you merge in the first fight and the second fight and combine it into one, that's how I think the Ilia Topuria versus Tsarukyan fight is going to end up like. There's a chance that this could be a bit more competitive than we think, or than I think, where obviously Ilia Topuria could still get taken down, Tsarukyan has his moments, but in a 25-minute fight, 5 rounds, there is no way that Tsarukyan is not going to go out there and get clipped. At some point, he will. Even on the feet defensively, he's not that responsible. Like, he is still progressing. He is still getting better, but he is still not even close to being, an elite striker or a decent striker, in my opinion. He's a good enough striker for, the wrestler that he is, but he's not even close to being elite, right? So I see this fight, just Ilia Topuria. Maybe he gets taken down a couple of times, but I don't think he gets controlled, Chimaev DDP style. I think if he does get taken down, to me, there's no submission threat because obviously Tsarukyan has one submission win in the UFC. I think Ilia will get back to his feet like he did against Charles Oliveira, which, obviously Charles Oliveira is a far more dangerous submission artist than Tsarukyan because he has, the most amount of submission wins in the UFC or something. And that's a guy that Ilia Topuria fought and pulled the crucifix against and was able to stand back up. I think he could do the same thing to Arman Tsarukyan, even if Arman is, stronger and maybe he is a better pure wrestler than Charles Oliveira. I think Ilia Topuria will be wary of that going into this fight. And I think if he does get taken down, he'll get back up, and eventually they'll keep it on the feet, and Ilia will catch him. That's how I see the fight going. I do think he will stuff a lot of the takedowns. It's not going to be like the Chimaev DDP fight or Islam JDM. I don't think that's the case. I explained it why earlier, because Topuria is not a novice on the ground. He's not a Holloway, right? And Tsarukyan is not a dominant submission artist, a dominant chain wrestler like Chimaev and Islam are. So, yeah, my prediction would be Ilia Topuria by knockout. I don't know if he does it in the first round because I think Tsarukyan has a higher fight IQ, or at least he will show up in this fight with a higher fight IQ than Charles Oliveira and not just rush into range and start pocket boxing with Ilia. But I think the outcome is inevitable. I think he does get stopped, maybe like by round 2, round 3. So let me know what you guys think, and I'll see you later. Goodbye.